The first time Clara Bennett sat at the Hawthorne family's dining table, nobody offered her a chair. They offered her a silver tray. "Stand behind Mrs. Hawthorne," the housekeeper whispered. "And whatever happens, don't speak unless you're spoken to." Clara lowered her eyes and obeyed. Across the long mahogany table, the richest ranch family in 3 counties laughed over roasted beef, imported wine, and plans for a spring cattle sale worth more money than Clara had seen in her entire life. Then Evelyn Hawthorne noticed the small tear near the cuff of Clara's dress. She lifted her glass and smiled. "Margaret, where did you find this one?" The older housekeeper stiffened. Clara felt every eye turned toward her. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "She looks like she wandered in from the livestock pens." Her daughter laughed. So did 2 visiting ranchers. Clara stood perfectly still, holding the silver tray while her cheeks burned. But one person at the table did not laugh. Daniel Hawthorne, the eldest son and future owner of the largest cattle ranch in western Colorado, slowly put down his fork. He looked at Clara, then at his family. And before that winter was over, the woman they had mocked as nothing more than a poor maid would force the Hawthornes to confront something their money had never been able to buy: respect. And Daniel Hawthorne would have to decide whether the family name he had inherited was worth losing the woman he loved. If stories about ordinary people finding dignity, justice, and unexpected love speak to something in you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. Because Clara Bennett's story did not begin with romance. It began with humiliation. In the autumn of 1887, Clara Bennett arrived in the small cattle town of Fairhaven, Colorado, carrying 1 carpet bag and $17 sewn into the lining of her coat. She was 27 years old. Her father had died the previous winter after a logging accident in Missouri. Her mother had been gone since Clara was 14, and the small family farm had disappeared beneath debts neither of them had understood until men from the bank came to claim it. Clara had spent 6 months moving west. She cooked at boarding houses, washed linen for railway workers, and once slept 3 nights in a church storeroom after a hotel owner disappeared without paying his staff. She had learned not to ask life for fairness, only for another chance. Fairhaven seemed like one. The town sat between brown hills and open grassland beneath a sky so wide Clara could barely understand it. Wagons crowded the main street. Cowboys tied horses outside saloons. Ranchers argued over cattle prices beside the telegraph office. Above all of them stood the name Hawthorne. Hawthorne beef supplied military posts, hotels, mining towns, and railway companies across the West. The Hawthorne Ranch covered thousands of acres outside Fairhaven. Its owner, Charles Hawthorne, had come west nearly 30 years earlier with 2 horses and a rifle and built an empire through relentless work, hard bargaining, and, according to some people in town, a willingness to crush anyone standing in his path. His wife, Evelyn, had arrived from Boston after the money was already made. She had spent the following 25 years making certain nobody forgot that distinction. When Clara heard Hawthorne Ranch needed another housemaid, she walked 7 miles from town to apply. Margaret Doyle, the head housekeeper, interviewed her in the kitchen. "You ever worked in a house this large?" "No, ma'am." "No silver?" "I know how to clean it." "Fine china?" "I know how not to break it." Margaret almost smiled. "What about difficult people?" Clara thought about unpaid wages, drunken customers, and landlords who locked doors after midnight. "I know how not to let them change who I am." That answer got her the position. The Hawthorne house stood on a rise overlooking endless pasture. It had stone chimneys, wide verandas, polished walnut floors, and more rooms than Clara could count her first week. Evelyn Hawthorne inspected her the morning she arrived. She circled Clara once as though buying a horse. "You're thinner than the last girl." "Yes, ma'am." "Your hands are rough." "Yes, ma'am." "And that accent." Clara said nothing. Evelyn sighed. "Margaret, teach her how to speak properly around guests." Clara had not been in the house 10 minutes. Already she understood. The Hawthornes did not simply employ servants. They measured them. Every meal became another opportunity. Evelyn's 23-year-old daughter, Beatrice, was even worse than her mother. Beatrice had returned from a finishing school in St. Louis with trunks full of dresses, complaints about frontier life, and the firm belief that kindness towards servants encouraged laziness. One afternoon, she dropped a lace handkerchief directly beside Clara's feet. Clara bent to retrieve it. Beatrice watched her. "No, leave it." Clara straightened. Beatrice waited several seconds. "Now pick it up." Clara understood immediately. It had never been about the handkerchief. It was about demonstrating that Beatrice could command another human being to bend. Clara picked it up anyway. Not because Beatrice had won, because Clara needed the wages. There was a difference. Daniel Hawthorne returned to the ranch 4 days later. Clara first saw him through the kitchen window. He rode in beside 3 ranch hands covered in trail dust, his coat tied behind his saddle and his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was 32, tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark brown hair, gray eyes, and a face weathered enough to make it clear he worked more than his family's dinner table suggested. He had spent nearly a month moving cattle south before the first snow. Clara expected another spoiled Hawthorne. Instead, when Daniel entered the kitchen for coffee, Margaret scolded him before he reached the cupboard. Boots. Daniel looked down at the mud. Yes, ma'am. You know better. He stepped backward. Clara nearly smiled. The richest rancher's son in Fairhaven was apparently afraid of the housekeeper. Daniel noticed her. You must be new. Clara Bennett. He extended his hand. Clara stared at it. Servants were not normally greeted that way. Daniel seemed to understand her hesitation. He lowered his hand gently. Welcome to Hawthorne Ranch, Miss Bennett. Then he removed his muddy boots and went through the back hall in his stocking feet. For the first time since arriving, Clara laughed. Very quietly. Daniel heard her. He smiled over his shoulder. It should have ended there. For several weeks, it almost did. They lived in different worlds beneath the same roof. Daniel spent most days outdoors. Clara worked before sunrise until long after dinner. They passed one another in hallways. Sometimes he greeted her. Sometimes she poured his coffee. Nothing about it seemed important. Then came the November dinner. Charles Hawthorne had invited ranchers from Denver and Pueblo to discuss expanding a cattle shipping agreement. Clara was assigned to the dining room. Halfway through the meal, one of the guests, Mr. Franklin Weaver, asked where the new maid had come from. Evelyn answered before Clara could. Some farm in Missouri, apparently. They grow them sturdier there, if not prettier. Laughter moved around the table. Clara stared at the tray in her hands. Beatrice joined in. She arrived with 1 dress worth wearing and 2 that Margaret should have burned. More laughter. Daniel's jaw tightened. Charles ignored it. Clara continued serving. Then Evelyn looked toward her. Turn around, Clara. Clara froze. I'm sorry. Turn around. Beatrice says Margaret repaired the back of your uniform rather cleverly. Beatrice covered her smile. The visiting ranchers watched. Something inside Clara changed. She had accepted long hours, low wages, criticism, orders, but she would not become entertainment. She placed the serving tray on the sideboard. No, ma'am. The room went silent. Evelyn's smile disappeared. What did you say? I said no, ma'am. Beatrice stared. Charles finally looked up. Clara's heart pounded so violently she could feel it beneath her collar. Evelyn's voice became cold. You appear confused about your position in this house. Clara swallowed. I know exactly what my position is. I serve dinner. I clean rooms. I wash linens. But being paid to work in this house doesn't mean I'm here to be laughed at. Nobody moved. Evelyn looked almost astonished. Then Daniel pushed back his chair. My mother owes you an apology. Evelyn turned toward him. Daniel. You heard her. This is none of your concern. You made it everyone's concern when you humiliated her in front of the table. Charles's expression hardened. That's enough. Daniel looked at his father. No, sir. It should have been enough several minutes ago. Clara wanted to disappear. Daniel had defended her. But his defense also ensured every member of the Hawthorne family would remember what had happened. Evelyn stood. Margaret will pay your wages in the morning. Clara's stomach dropped. She had known refusal might cost her the job. Knowing did not make losing it easier. Daniel stood too. If Clara goes because she refused to be mocked, I'll replace every servant in this house myself. Beatrice laughed. You? Daniel nodded. You like breakfast at 7, don't you? Beatrice stopped laughing. Charles studied his son. For several seconds, father and son stared across the table. Then Charles returned to his meal. Clara keeps her job. Evelyn looked at him in disbelief. Charles. I said she keeps it. The matter was finished. At least publicly. That evening Clara found Daniel outside the kitchen door. The wind had turned cold. He leaned against a wooden post while she carried ashes toward the disposal pit. You shouldn't have done that, Clara said. Defended you? Made your family angrier. They were wrong. That usually doesn't stop rich people. Daniel laughed once. No, it usually doesn't. Clara kept walking. Daniel followed at a respectful distance. You surprised them. I surprised myself. You weren't afraid? Clara stopped. I was terrified. Daniel's smile disappeared. Then why say anything? Clara looked toward the dark pasture. Because sometimes you let people take something small from you because you need the work. Then something else. Then something else. Eventually you realize they haven't just taken your pride. You handed it over. Daniel was silent. Clara turned toward him. My father used to say poor people already lose enough without helping anyone take the rest. Something about those words stayed with Daniel. After that evening, he noticed Clara differently. Not as a servant. Not even yet as a woman he was attracted to. He noticed how people changed when she entered a room. Margaret trusted her. The kitchen staff laughed more around her. Older ranch hands stopped by the back steps because Clara remembered which of them took sugar in their coffee. When one young cowboy named Samuel broke his wrist, Clara spent 3 evenings writing letters home for him because he could barely hold a pencil. Daniel began finding reasons to remain near the house. At first, Clara pretended not to notice. He asked unnecessary questions in the kitchen. He volunteered to carry boxes she could manage herself. One Sunday afternoon, he discovered her reading beside the stable while the household rested. What are you reading? She showed him the book. Jane Eyre. Daniel nodded solemnly. I know absolutely nothing about it. Clara laughed. At least you admit it. I was hoping you might explain. Why? So I can pretend I'm educated. She looked at him over the page. You own 3,000 cattle. Cattle rarely ask what I've read. She laughed again. Daniel realized he liked causing that sound. Their friendship grew quietly. They talked beside fences. In the barn. During early mornings before the house awakened, Daniel told her about the ranch. His grandfather had died before Charles could remember him. Charles had built the Hawthorne operation from almost nothing and expected Daniel to expand it. Is that what you want? Clara asked. Daniel looked across the pasture. I want the ranch. That wasn't my question. He turned toward her. Clara waited. Daniel eventually smiled. You do that often. What? Asked the question behind the question. Clara closed her book. You don't have to answer. He thought for a moment. I love the land. I love the work. I'm not sure I love what my family believes the ranch entitles us to become. Clara understood more than he expected. Wealth was not the thing Daniel feared. Becoming his father was. December brought deep snow. The ranch became isolated for days at a time. One evening, a blizzard swept down from the mountains faster than anyone expected. 2 ranch hands failed to return from checking a northern fence line. Daniel organized a search. Clara watched riders disappear into white darkness. Hours passed. Then one horse returned alone. Margaret crossed herself. Evelyn demanded Daniel stay inside. Charles ordered more men out. Clara noticed something everyone else missed. The loose horse carried a broken length of rope tied around its saddle horn. She had grown up around farm animals. She knew what a snapped working rope could mean. When Daniel came inside for fresh gloves, Clara stopped him. The creek crossing. Daniel turned. What? If they were trying to pull a trapped animal, the rope might have broken. The northern creek freezes. Not evenly. There's a spring under the east bank. Daniel stared at her. How do you know? I walked there with Samuel last week when we collected branches for the kitchen stove. Daniel did not hesitate. He changed the search direction. Less than an hour later, they found both missing men. One had fallen through thin ice while trying to free a calf. The second had dragged him partly out before injuring his leg. Both survived. That night, Daniel entered the kitchen after everyone else had gone upstairs. Clara was cleaning cups. You saved 2 lives. I suggested a creek. You knew something the rest of us didn't. She looked at him. That must be uncomfortable for a Hawthorne. Daniel laughed. Then neither of them spoke. The room felt suddenly smaller. Daniel looked at Clara the way a man looks when he has finally understood something he had been trying not to understand. Clara felt it too. She stepped backward. Good night, Mr. Hawthorne. Daniel. She shook her head. Not here. That stopped him. For the next several weeks, Clara avoided being alone with him. She knew what affection between them could become, and she knew the cost would not fall equally. Daniel Hawthorne could survive a scandal. Clara Bennett could lose her livelihood and her reputation with one rumor. But affection has a way of growing in the spaces people try hardest to close. Daniel started leaving books on the kitchen shelf. Clara left them there for several days before reading them. Then she began slipping notes between the pages. Not romantic notes. Arguments. Daniel had written beside a passage from Dickens, "You would disagree with this." Clara replied, "You're improving." He found it the next morning. Soon entire conversations appeared in margins and scraps of paper. Their courtship began without either of them calling it one. Beatrice discovered the first note in February. She recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. She said nothing to him. Instead, she carried the book upstairs to Evelyn. That evening, Evelyn summoned Clara to the drawing room. Daniel was away purchasing cattle. Charles had gone into town. Only Evelyn and Beatrice waited. The book rested on the table. Clara knew immediately. Evelyn folded her hands. "My son appears to have developed an unfortunate interest in you." Clara kept her voice steady. "Mr. Hawthorne has been kind. Do not insult me." Beatrice smiled from the sofa. Evelyn continued, "I understand what a woman in your position might imagine." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. "What position is that?" "Poor. Unattached. Nearly 30. Beatrice looked amused. Evelyn leaned forward. "Daniel is heir to this ranch. He will marry a woman capable of strengthening this family." Clara stared at her. "You believe I'm trying to marry him?" "I believe hunger creates ambition." The insult landed harder than Clara expected. Evelyn opened a small purse and placed money on the table. $50. More than 2 months of Clara's wages. "Take this and leave Fairhaven." Clara looked at the bills, then at Evelyn. "You think $50 buys your son's feelings?" "It buys distance." Clara slowly picked up the money. Beatrice smiled. Then Clara crossed the room and placed it in the fireplace. The bills caught fire. Evelyn stood. "You foolish girl." Clara turned toward her. "No, Mrs. Hawthorne." "Poor girl. There's a difference." She walked upstairs, packed her carpet bag, and left the ranch before Daniel returned. Margaret begged her to stay. Clara refused. "I will not spend another night beneath a roof where someone believes my heart can be purchased like a horse." She found a room in Fairhaven above a widow's dress shop. By morning, she had work. Not much, but enough. Daniel returned the next afternoon. When he discovered Clara was gone, the argument between him and his mother could be heard from the front staircase. "You paid her." "I protected you." "From what?" "From embarrassment." Daniel stared at her. "You embarrassed me." Evelyn's face changed. Daniel continued, "You insulted a woman who has done nothing but work honestly in this house. She is a maid." "She was a maid." "She is also more decent than half the people you invite to dinner." Charles entered during the argument. "Daniel." Daniel turned. His father's voice was calm. "You know your responsibility." Daniel laughed bitterly. "There it is. Family matters. So does character." Charles stepped closer. "You think marriage is simply about affection? Ranches like this survive through alliances, reputation, and stability." Daniel looked at him. "You married mother for those things?" Charles did not answer. Daniel understood the answer anyway. He left. Clara was working in the dress shop when Daniel found her. She saw him through the window and immediately wished she had not. He entered. The widow who owned the shop wisely disappeared behind a curtain. Daniel removed his hat. "I'm sorry." Clara continued folding fabric. "You didn't offer the money." "No." "You didn't insult me." "No." "Then don't apologize for someone else." "I should have known." "You can't prevent every cruel thing your family says." "I can prevent myself from accepting it." That made Clara stop. Daniel stepped closer. "I care about you." Clara looked away. "Daniel." "I have for months." "You don't know what you're saying." "I do." "No. You know what you feel while things are difficult and exciting. That is not the same as building a life." He stared at her. "You think I'm playing with you?" "I think you have never had to choose between love and everything you were raised to inherit." Daniel became quiet. Clara's eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "If you choose me today because you're angry with them, someday you may look across a breakfast table and wonder whether I cost you too much." "I wouldn't." "You don't know that." He reached for her hand. Clara stepped back. "Go home, Daniel." He did, but he did not surrender. For 3 months, he gave Clara exactly what she asked for. Space. He did not arrive at the shop every day. He did not send expensive gifts. He did not try to rescue her. Instead, Daniel began changing his own life. He refused a proposed marriage his mother had quietly been arranging with the daughter of a Denver cattle investor. He moved from the main house into a small foreman's cottage near the western pasture. Most importantly, he confronted his father about something larger than Clara. For years, Hawthorne Ranch hands had been paid partly through a company store system that kept several families permanently indebted. Daniel had always disliked it. Now he demanded it end. Charles refused. Daniel offered to give up his management salary to cover the first year of wage adjustments. His father stared at him. All this because of that woman? Daniel shook his head. No. She just made me notice how many things I'd trained myself not to see. That answer frightened Charles more than rebellion would have. Daniel was no longer fighting for Clara. He was becoming someone different. By summer, ranch workers were being paid fully in cash. Daniel sold 2 of his personal breeding horses to finance repairs on workers' cabins. People noticed, including Clara. One July evening, the town held its annual Founders' Dance inside the old railway hall. Clara nearly did not attend. Margaret convinced her. You've spent half your life working while other people enjoyed themselves. Wear the blue dress. Clara had sewn it herself. Simple. Dark blue. No jewels. No lace imported from France. When she entered the hall, conversations turned toward her anyway. Daniel stood near the far wall. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then he walked across the room. Evelyn and Beatrice were present. So was Charles. Daniel stopped in front of Clara and held out his hand. May I have this dance? Every instinct Clara possessed told her to refuse. Every eye in Fairhaven was watching. Then she remembered that dining room. The silver tray. The laughter. The command to turn around so wealthy strangers could inspect the repaired back of her uniform. Clara placed her hand in Daniel's. Yes. The room did not erupt. No one gasped dramatically. The fiddlers simply began another song. Daniel put one hand carefully at Clara's waist. They danced. Evelyn left before the music ended. But Charles stayed. He watched his son. More importantly, he watched Clara. Not the maid. The woman. 2 days later, Charles entered the dress shop. Clara almost dropped a box of buttons. I'd like a word. The widow disappeared again. Apparently, Fairhaven shopkeepers had perfected the art of strategic absence. Charles remained standing. My wife treated you badly. Clara waited. He was clearly unfamiliar with apology. She was wrong. Clara almost smiled. Was that painful? His mouth moved slightly. Extremely. She laughed. Charles looked toward the window. Daniel intends to marry you. Clara's smile faded. He hasn't asked. He will. You seem very certain. I know my son. Clara folded her hands. And why are you here? Charles took several seconds before answering. Because I spent 30 years believing everything I built had to be protected from people who wanted something from us. That sounds lonely. It was practical. Those aren't always different things. Charles looked at her. You sound like Daniel. No. Daniel has started sounding like me. For the first time, Charles laughed. Then his expression became serious. I still believe this marriage will be difficult. So do I. That doesn't concern you? Of course it does. You'll be judged. I already am. People will say you married him for money. People said I was chasing him when I was still washing his family's sheets. Charles nodded slowly. And if Daniel loses part of his inheritance? Clara's answer came immediately. Then he'll have less money. Charles stared at her. That was all. No plea. No argument. No claim that love conquered everything. Just a plain answer from a woman who knew what being poor actually meant. Charles left the shop understanding why his son loved her. Daniel proposed 3 weeks later beside the northern creek where Clara's observation had once helped save 2 ranch hands. He did not bring a crowd. He did not kneel inside a ballroom. He carried a small ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Clara Bennett, I loved you when you worked in my parents' house. I loved you after you left it. I loved you when you refused to let me rescue you. And I loved you enough to finally understand you were never the person who needed rescuing. Clara's eyes filled. Daniel continued. I can't promise my family will become easy. I can't promise people won't talk. I can promise that I will never ask you to become smaller, so I can remain comfortable. He opened the ring box. Will you marry me? Clara looked at him for several seconds. Then she smiled. Yes. Their wedding was held that September. Not at the Hawthorne mansion. Clara refused. They married in a small white church outside Fairhaven with ranch hands, townspeople, shopkeepers, and several families who had once worked the Hawthorne land. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Charles attended. Beatrice attended reluctantly. Evelyn did not. At least not at first. As the minister began, a carriage stopped outside. Evelyn stepped down wearing black silk. She entered quietly and sat in the final pew. Clara saw her. Daniel saw her too. Neither reacted. After the ceremony, Evelyn approached the couple. For once she seemed uncertain. She looked at Clara. I behaved disgracefully toward you. Clara said nothing. Evelyn continued. I thought protecting my family meant deciding who deserved to enter it. Her eyes moved toward Daniel. I was wrong. Clara studied her. Forgiveness did not erase humiliation, but dignity did not require revenge either. Thank you for saying it. Evelyn nodded. That was all Clara offered. It was enough. Daniel did inherit Hawthorne Ranch years later. But the ranch he inherited was not the ranch Clara first entered carrying a silver tray. Workers received proper wages. Families living on Hawthorne land had written contracts. A small schoolhouse opened near the southern pasture, partly funded by Clara, who never forgot what education had meant to her father. Beatrice eventually married a banker in Denver and visited rarely. Evelyn took longer to change. Some habits built over decades did not vanish after one wedding. But she learned. Slowly, sometimes awkwardly. When Clara and Daniel's first daughter was born, Evelyn came to the cottage and asked permission before entering. Clara noticed that. Years later, visitors to Hawthorne Ranch occasionally heard the story of how Daniel Hawthorne had scandalized Fairhaven by marrying a maid. Clara always corrected them. I wasn't a maid when he married me. Then she would smile. And he wasn't much of a Hawthorne anymore. Daniel would pretend to be offended. Their children never fully understood the joke. But Clara did. She had arrived at that ranch with one carpet bag, $17, and a dress people considered too poor to respect. She left the servants' quarters with the same name she entered with. Clara Bennett. What changed was never her worth. Only the number of people finally capable of seeing it. And perhaps that was the part of the story Daniel loved most. He had grown up believing wealth made a family important. Clara taught him something his father's thousands of acres never could. A fine house could impress strangers. A famous name could open doors. Money could buy land, livestock, influence, and comfort. But none of those things could turn cruelty into class. And none of them could make a person worthy of love. That had to be earned. One choice at a time. One act of courage at a time. And sometimes, love arrived wearing a plain servant's dress, carrying a silver tray, while everyone else in the room was too busy laughing to recognize what had just walked through the door. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. And if you enjoy heartfelt frontier romances about ordinary people discovering extraordinary love, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have many more unforgettable stories waiting to share with you.